Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, and we're going to discuss the end of the 12 days war between these two countries. Furthermore, we're going to talk about the statements that were made by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, and also we will try to understand whether it's the end of the war or just the beginning of something bigger. Furthermore, during this video we're going to discuss the situation in Ukraine, where the Russians continue their offensive operation and where the Ukrainians announced additional terrorist attack against the Russian civilians and the population of Russia. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but one thing we can say for sure, that the Russians once again managed to improve their positions during the previous night, and they managed to do this significantly. So let's start, and let's begin with Israel and with Iran. And first let's talk about the statements that were made by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. In the evening of the 23rd of June of 2025, the President of the United States of America made several very important statements. And probably this was the first one and one of the most important, because he stated that congratulations world, it's time for peace. This post was published on his social network somewhere at 11 p.m. on the 23rd of June of 2025. And obviously everybody understood that he was talking first of all about the conflict between Israel and Iran. Later, he made another statement, and he made this statement at 12 a.m. He reported that congratulations to everyone, it has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran have put down and completed their in-progress final missions. For 12 hours, there is going to be ceasefire, first ceasefire, at which point the war will be considered ended. So this is very important statement, and as he promised, 6 hours later he made another statement. This ceasefire is now in effect. Please do not violate it. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. So these three statements were very important, and according to these statements, the war between Israel and Iran finished during the previous night. This is very important, and this war finished with the retaliatory strike of Iran on the US bases that were located on the territory of the state by the name of Qatar. So this is small states in the area of the Persian Gulf. There are lots of bases of the United States of America, and during the previous nights the Iranians launched several missiles in this area with the purpose to damage bases of the United States of America. But before this attack, according to information we have, the Iranians send the message to the Qatarians. Probably they do this with the purpose, the Qatarians send this message to the United States of America, that the Iranians were planning to carry out this attack. And of course, by the time the missiles arrived in this area, there were nobody on the territory of the US base. Later we got report that the Iranians also, through the Qatarians, sent the message to the United States of America that they don't want additional escalation, and they want to start peace talks and ceasefire. The United States of America accepted this message from the Iranians through the Qatarians, and they confirmed that they're not going to strike back. So basically this is the end of the conflict and the beginning of ceasefire. So, and later, right, several minutes or several hours later, the President of the United States of America made his statements that we've just discussed. So as we can see, the war has ended, or it's just a temporary ceasefire. Very difficult to understand. One thing we know for sure, that as for the beginning of the 24th of June of 2025, the Iranians reported and they stated that they won the war with the Israelis. The Iranians are saying that they managed to force the Iranians to realize the situation, that the Iranians is a tough nut, that it's impossible to force them to surrender, and the Iranians managed to force the Israelis to probably review all their plans, revival plans, and to begin the process of ceasefire. We believe that, and of course, according to information we have, the United States of America and the Israelis announced that they managed to win the Iranians by destroying their nuclear program and nuclear enrichment plants, the entire nuclear facilities of Iran. So as we can see, both the Iranians and the Israelis announced of their own victories in this war, and this is very interesting signal, because now there are just several options both for the Israelis and for the Iranians. Either we are going to see, let's say, long-term peace and ceasefire between these two countries. Maybe we're going to see that the United States of America will lift some sanctions from Iran, or in the very near future we are going to see another war between these two countries, but this war is going to be much more violent, with much more strikes deep inside of the territories of each other. And obviously time will tell us, because both sides, the Israelis and the Iranians, managed to discover weak points in their defense. The Israelis realized the weak point in their air defense system, and if they want to continue or to start the same war in the future, obviously first of all they need to think about their air defense. And when talking about the Iranians, obviously there are lots of things to do also with air defense, and of course with rich spy network that is currently located on the territory of the state, because obviously the Iranians had very bad days at the beginning of this special operation that was begun by the Israelis, and mainly due to rich network of spies on the territory of the state. Basically, that was a turning point and major victory of Israelis in this war. Anyway, let's wait and see, and obviously the situation will develop. Now let's return to Ukraine. We have lots of very interesting articles, statements, and changes on the ground. And first, let's talk about several statements that were made by the Ukrainian authorities, and this one is very interesting. The second person of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, made very interesting statement during the previous 24 hours. All Russians must feel what it's like to be in constant danger. Yermak threatens the Russians with new terrorist attacks, so most likely something is ready from his side. Also, during the previous 24 hours, the Andriy Yermak, the second person of Ukraine, stated that Zelensky is the best president ever in Ukraine. Zelensky must definitely run again. He's the best president in the entire history of independent Ukraine, said the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak. And by the way, today Zelensky also made another statement. Maybe not today, but just today. This statement was published. He was interviewed several days ago, and he stated that he must stay as a president until the end of this war. So he doesn't say that he has the right to be a president. He doesn't say that according to constitution he's a legal president or something like this. He's just saying that he must stay as a president of Ukraine until the end of the war, because he has the biggest experience ever as a president during the war period of time. So which means that both the Ukraine, Zelensky, are trying to prepare the population before the beginning of another president elections, but at the same time he's trying to tell us that he's not going to go anywhere. Now let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact, and very interesting updates are coming from the northern Kupiansk direction. Today, both the neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. According to these sources, the village of Golubovka was taken by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. The Russians secured this territory, and this is very important piece of news, because I would like to remind you that during the previous days we got lots of reports, and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the village of Mirova or Moskovika was taken by the Russians, and based on that report of the Minister of Defense we adjusted this small pocket in Russian favor, and then we make a conclusion that most likely the Russians will try to cut the pocket in the vicinity of Golubovka. And today several sources, as you can see, confirmed this information, that most likely the this village and this territory, and these facilities were secured by the Russians, and the Russians currently have very strong positions to the north of the city of Kupiansk to begin the operation in the direction of the northern part of the city of Kupiansk itself. The Russians most likely are going to continue their offensive operation in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction or the Liman direction. According to information we have, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Grekovka. Several tree lines were taken by the Russians in this area. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the direction of the settlement of Glushenkova. So let's compare the maps. This is the situation by the end of the 23rd of June, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 24th of June. These fields, as you can see, were taken by the Russians according to several mappers, and these positions were taken by the Russians also according to neutral mappers and according to pro-Ukrainian resources. As you can see, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, we got another batch of changes in this area, and according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians improved their position significantly. As we discussed in the previous videos, the most important target, and the Russians are tasked to maintain their lines in this area with the purpose to establish control over this red line and to get as close as possible to the settlement of Chernyshina. And when talking about this area and about this direction, and according to geolocations and recent updates we have, there's just one settlement left for the Russians. We are talking about the village of Novoigorovka, and then the Russians will be able to establish complete 100% control over the entire Lugansk Oblast, which is obviously could be very important and very powerful media victory for the Russians. And we believe that the Russians are going to be focused in achieving this task during the next several weeks. Now let's discuss the situation in the Constantinovka direction. According to information we have, the Russians improved their positions, and today this information, for the first time probably since the beginning of the battle for the Kliban-Byksky pocket, the Ukrainian sources confirmed this information. Once again, pro-Ukrainian sources made huge adjustments on their maps, showing a significant progress of the Russians between the villages of Romanovka and the city of Toretsk. As you can see, according to these changes, we haven't added anything to our map because most of the changes that this morning were shown by pro-Ukrainian sources were already added to our map a long time ago, as well as different mappers did the same. As we discussed in the previous videos, now the deep state is trying to get everybody. They're much far behind the real situation on the ground when talking about geolocations. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, and according to information we have, the Russians continue their attempts to attack the settlement of Novaya Ekonomichne and to outflank the Ukrainians with the purpose to answer the village of Novotoretska. And today this information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources, and this is probably the first exception from the rule that we discussed just a minute ago about pro-Ukrainian sources. This is probably the only change on the ground that shows something additional in comparison with other mappers. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to take under control these three lines, fortifications, and this stronghold on their way to the eastern direction of the settlement of Novotoretska. Furthermore, according to several pro-Russian resources, as we discussed in the previous videos, some Russian assault groups managed to enter already the eastern part of Novotoretska, and there are very heavy clashes right now. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, these territory is considered by them as a contested area. Several pro-Russian resources reported about strong control over these territories. Furthermore, we have this video, and in this video we can see how Russian motor rifle forces were trying to attack the settlement of Mirny and the settlement of Novaya Ekonomichne with the use of tanks and motorcycles. The Russians were moving along N32 road in the direction of Novaya Ekonomichne, and the Ukrainians were trying to slow them down with FPV drones. So once again, the Russians were trying to carry out the maneuver with motorcycles with the purpose to get as close as possible to the village of Novaya Ekonomichne and Nikolaevka, maybe with the purpose to take under control this dense network of the fortifications. But as we can see, this first attempt of Russian attack was repelled by Ukrainian FPV drones. As for the western flank of the city of Pokrovsk, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to secure the village of Novosergeyevka, and the Russian sources published this video where we can see how Russians raised the Russian flag in the most central part or in the most western part of the settlement. Also in this video we can see several episodes how the Russians were fighting for the village, how the Russians were attacking temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine, how the Russians were carrying out the artillery preparation. So based on this video and based on this episode that was published by the Ukrainian sources, we adjusted the map and we have colored the village of Novosergeyevka completely under Russian control. Most likely today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. And when talking about this direction, we see that the Russians began their major offensive operation in this area because it's already a third day when we receive additional changes on the ground. So this is the situation by the end of the 21st of June. This is the situation by the end of the 22nd of June. The Russians secured the area on the way to Udachne. By the end of the 23rd of June, the Russians managed to improve their positions once again in the area on the way to the village of Udachne. And by the morning of the 24th of June, the Russians secured the village of Novosergeyevka, and once again they managed to improve their positions in the area of Udachne. So summarizing everything, we see that now the Russians are trying to advance in the north from Novosergeyevka with the purpose to answer the villages of Molodetskaya and the settlement of Udachne. So this is the task of the Russians as for this stage of offensive operation in the western flank of the city of Pokrovsk. As for the Dnipropetrovsk direction, the Russians during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, managed to answer the village of Yalta, and this information was confirmed by neutral mappers and by several pro-Russian resources and by pro-Ukrainian sources. So every single source, independent source, confirmed Russian control over the eastern part of the village of Yalta, and the Russians continue advancing. So if the Russians manage to answer the village of Yalta, most likely during the next several days, the Russians would be able to force the Ukrainians to fall back in the direction of the village of Zirka, and the village of Yalta most likely would be colored in Russian favor, and the battle for the final village in this area will begin. At the same time, the Russians continue advancing in the fields in the direction of Shevchenka. The sources reported that the Russians secured completely the eastern part of the settlement, and by the morning of the 24th of June of 2025, the Russians established control for over more than 70% of the settlement. The Ukrainians controlled just the northwestern part of this village, and most likely during the upcoming days the Ukrainians would be forced to abandon this village in the direction of the settlement of Maliivka. At the same time, the Russians are trying to attack through the fields to the north of Shevchenka in the direction of Voskresenka, and the Russians are attacking in the same direction towards the village of Voskresenka, but this time from the east. So this Russian offensive operation in this direction is gaining momentum, and the Russians will not stop until they get the border of Dnipropetrovsk region and the Zaparogia regions. Also, we have lots of interesting updates from the Zaparogia direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published lots of videos of how they were bombing and attacking the territory between the villages of Plavny, Stepnogorsk and Kamenska. Lots of explosions, lots of strikes were recorded, so it seems that the Russians launched something like artillery preparation, and due to this concentration of fire, due to these strikes, we believe that in the very near future, the Russians will begin their major offensive operation in this area with the purpose to take this territory under complete control and to get as close as possible to the city of Zaparogia itself, with the purpose to establish certain FPV drone control over this territory as well. And that's it for the short video on military with summary. Channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.